Welcome to Carousel. I'm Marcelle Soviero, your host, and today we're going to hop on the carousel and meet interesting people and talk about interesting things. Today my guest is Shiva Sarram. Shiva was a war refugee from Iran as a child and has built a foundation based on her experience in Iran, which focuses on funding projects that empower children to escape the cycle of violence. So welcome.
Thanks.
And we're excited to hear about your background and all you've done with your foundation.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing, and then we'll get into how that sort of informed you as an adult. But
sure. I was born in Iran to Iranian parents who were educated in the States, and after the revolution started in Iran and the war started, we were one of the fortunate ones who were able to actually leave Iran. But I certainly have a lot of memories about what that time of conflict and war in our country was like. It was what felt like very much an overnight phenomenon of doing homework by candlelight all of a sudden because of fear of being bombed, going to school in constant fear. So that's sort of been the inspiration to start the foundation. I have just a little glimmer of insight into what it's like to be a child living in a conflict zone.
Right. So how long did you stay in Iran, and how did you get into the United States?
So I was in Iran for about a year after the war started. So the revolution started in '79. We left in '81. The war started in '80. So we were unfortunately there for enough, frankly, to affect me for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And as I said, my parents were educated in the States. My father is a nuclear scientist, and we moved to Vienna, Austria for a short period of time where he was able to get a job with the United Nations.
Okay.
And after that, we moved to America, to the suburbs of Philadelphia.
Did you know anyone, or this was all new to you?
No, we had family. My mother's side of the family had all been living here, so we had some family roots here spread out across the two coasts, but it was still very unfamiliar territory, obviously.
Sure. So you were about 9-10 years old.
Yes.
And was that your first time to America then?
That was my first time to America. I remember it in the 4th grade, coming to the States. And
from a war-torn country.
From a war-torn country. And we left, as I said, what seemed to be overnight. I mean, we left food in the fridge, toys on the floor. I remember we came home from school and my mom said, we're leaving tomorrow. We don't know when we'll be back.
Wow.
Here's what you can pack in the suitcase. And I remember sort of scattering around for all my favorite things. And I do remember actually that sadly I left a package of stickers on the bureau. You sort of assume you're going to remember on the way to the airport to grab that. Sadly, I didn't. So I always have this tugging, nagging feeling as though I forgot something back home.
That's really interesting. So how did those childhood experiences impact your adult life, and sort of what are you working on now? So
I vividly remember being at the airport and sort of thinking, so I wonder why we get to leave and my cousins don't. And some of it is just the survivor's guilt that you feel. So I remember sort of making myself a promise at that airport that if I really got to have a great life, which I have, that I would try and do something to give back. So in a way, the Blossom Hill Foundation is sort of, I call it my third child. It's just that I've been giving birth to it for over 30 years. It's just something I've always wanted to do.
So when did Blossom Hill begin? How old is the organization now?
So we sort of formally filed all our paperwork in 2009, but we really didn't rush into anything. I wanted to make sure that if we did it right. So we took a lot of time in the beginning to form a great board of directors and really look at the landscape of children of war, figure out what their needs are, how do we help them break the cycle of violence, and what's the best programming out there to do that. And so we spent a good year and a half just looking at landscape. And what we concluded was that there are a lot of organizations serving children in war-torn countries, but not as many engaging them in actually becoming those leaders and agents of change in their own societies. And so that's sort of, if you look at the landscape, that's the niche that we sort of feel we've got the best grasp on, which is how do we engage children. And so I think we fundamentally believe in this defense of childhood, and that's what we work towards every day.
That's your mission. That's wonderful. What you said it's sort of been a dream for 30 years, and now you've begun it. Tell us a little bit about the projects that you've funded. I guess you've been working at this for about 3 years.
Yes.
And tell us about some of the success stories. Your Blossom Hill essentially funds programming.
Yes.
So what programs are you working on, and how have they helped?
So we're a 501c3. We're a grant-making organization.
Right.
And instead of, you know, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. When we looked at this landscape, we actually realized that there's a lot of great programs already on the ground serving children in conflict zones. They just don't have enough visibility, and they certainly don't have enough funding. So we make grants to US-based organizations that are doing the work in the field, and we go through a very rigorous process when we look at making grants. We vet them and go over every financial detail. And we really look for programs that are engaging children. So I'll give you an example. In Afghanistan, we help fund a back-to-school program. And these are children who are otherwise in the streets. Fathers have died in war, mothers are taking care of 7 hungry children, the kids themselves are on the street selling gum. And so we help fund a program that takes these children off the streets. They've never had formal schooling. And we help catch them up, and once they're caught up, they go back to school. And we found great success stories in this, where children who were up to 2 years ago selling candy on the streets with absolutely no future, and in fact at risk of falling into the equivalent of gangs in these areas, which often end up becoming rebel groups. So children who are very, very vulnerable and at risk, and we've turned around, and 2 years later they're fully caught up in school and they're able to enter the public school system. So it's a great way to help break that cycle of violence. And the best part is that not only have we broken that cycle, but then they turn around and they become the tutors of the following generation. So you sort of just help break the cycle, because the reality is that if we don't address this issue, and it's a very large issue, we have 1 billion children, 1 billion, living in war-torn and conflict regions. It's 1/7 of the population. So we're about to lose an entire generation of children who only know violence as a way of surviving. So we're trying to break that cycle one child at a time.
Wow. So I'm curious, do you ever have to travel to places where you're doing these projects?
Yes. So
do you get to meet some of the people you've helped?
Yes. So what we do is we're 18 months into our grant making. We're in 9 different countries across 3 different continents, and we have a diverse board of directors. And our board of directors, we have several members who are journalists, and so they're able to be our eyes and ears on the ground. We also Skype with our grantees regularly. We're in phone conversations with them. And actually, I'm hoping to go to a program that we help fund in Nicaragua in the spring with my own children, which I think will be really great. And I have plans to go to Jordan later in the year as well. So we're 18 months into that grant making, and it's sort of the time to really get to go and see them. But we get to meet them through Skype.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
For the time being.
I'm sure. How do you evaluate what projects and programs to support and fund? There must be many, and
there are many.
What are the criteria?
There are many, absolutely. As I said, the main criteria are programs that really are showing that are engaging and empowering. So we make 3 types of grants, leadership grants, and these are organizations that are already doing, frankly, everything we would want them to do.
Okay.
But what we ask them once we fund them is to then share their knowledge with other organizations that are sort of helping to not just serve children, but to engage children.
Okay.
Our second funding stream is sort of capacity building. There's a lot of humanitarian relief groups that have the reach into the most remote grassroots villages that you can imagine. So they've got that reach, but all they're doing, and I shouldn't say all because obviously it plays a pivotal role, but they're giving out diapers and water and rice. That's great. Right. But now what are we going to do in the long term for this group? And so we will make a grant to those organizations, but really work with them in helping them develop their capabilities to serve children in a more long-term fashion instead of just humanitarian aid. And then the third funding group that we're looking at right now very heavily is sort of social innovation grants. Okay. These are brand new thinkers. These are riskier grants because it's sort of like a new business idea. Some of them will make it, some of them won't. Okay. But let's say you have an idea to, ship 200 sewing machines to a village and sort of help engage a group of mothers who have otherwise never worked and husbands are not terribly supportive. So a new idea like that is something that we would look at. And so we're starting to look at some new innovative ways to help engage this population.
That's wonderful. I think you mentioned that you have an art program where, or photography, where you're engaging kids overseas with kids in America. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Sure. So the programs that we fund are academic, they're athletic based, we use sport and play, that's a big funding stream for us, as well as artistic. So in the case of the photography program, we help fund a program in Nicaragua which uses photography as sort of the draw to engage these children. But really what we want them to do is also the math and the Spanish. So it's after school programs that help supplement their academics, but also art is of course such a therapeutic way to help children deal with all the violence and trauma that they've experienced. So this organization coupled with the Carver Foundation, so Nico Photo in Nicaragua, coupled with Carver Foundation right here in Norwalk, actually. Great. And they did an exchange of photographs of children in Norwalk who are going through their own struggles, as well as the children in Nicaragua. And they published a book about expressing themselves through the art of photography. So there's so many ways to reach these children, and I think what's important to remember is that we're talking about serving some of the most basic needs. These are children that have never played with a soccer ball. They have played soccer with a dead pigeon in the street. So we're talking about very basic needs. These are children who, after a soccer game, the losing team has never shaken hands with a winning team and sort of said, great games. So we're teaching very basic sort of functionality to a group of children that has only known violence.
It's interesting because it seems to me it would be really hard to sort of impose, not imposing, but working on projects for engaging the children when, I assume their basic needs must be being met even though they're in a war-torn area in order to take advantage of, I'm just trying to figure out how that works. So
in some cases, for example, in the program that I was just referring to in Nicaragua, a hot meal is part of what they get. 80% of Nicaraguans live under the poverty line, live under $2 a day. So while math and Spanish and then expressing themselves through photography is a big element, the reality is that sometimes a hot meal is really a great draw as well. And it's amazing to see, for example, I think about Abigail and Sam in that program in Nicaragua. They're a brother and sister. They're 15 and 13, and up to 2 years ago, they were always in trouble. They were always fighting with someone and in trouble in school. 2 years later, they're honor students. You know, we can break the cycle. We really can. There are many days where I wake up and I feel, frankly, totally daunted by the task at hand when I think about 1 billion children. And I sort of get, you know, depressed about it. And then there's a lot of mornings where I wake up and I say, you know, we may be a drop in the bucket right now, but we have a methodology that works, and we have supporters that care about this issue, and a drop in the bucket is a drop in the bucket, and hopefully soon
eventually it fills up.
Exactly.
Right, that's wonderful. So with the example of the two, the 13-year-old and the 15-year-old that are now doing well in school, what program was it that they engaged in that got them on track?
So it's this after school program, exactly. So they come, they get a hot meal, they get help in sitting down and actually doing their homework.
Okay.
And it's amazing to watch them feel the reward of their own achievements.
Right.
And so whether it's the children in Afghanistan who, by coming to our back to school program, then get to go skateboard, or whether it's children in Nicaragua who, after doing their academics, get to go and learn how to garden or do yoga or learn how to use a camera. There's so many ways to reach these children.
Wow, that's wonderful. Are there any other examples of programs that you would like to talk about that you're funding right now?
You know, I think a lot about a program that we help fund in the Palestinian territories, which is really just play-based. So that program, called Right to Play, believes fundamentally that you can get children to cooperate more. You can teach children life skills and coping skills just by engaging them in sport. And so sometimes it's amazing what you can do with one coach and 20 soccer balls, and we're able to reach thousands of kids at a time, actually, by just engaging them in sport. And as I said, if just by teaching someone how to work as a team and frankly at the end of the game not be a sore loser and vent your frustrations, as you can imagine, this is very disenfranchised youth. They're frustrated. They've only known violence, and so we use something like the simple play of soccer as a way to engage with them. And what's great about that program is that you then see them become the soccer coaches.
Right,
and
it's a cycle,
it's a cycle,
as you say, a positive cycle.
A positive cycle.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's wonderful. What do you see on the horizon for your foundation? I mean, you're just getting going,
yes.
and what are your future plans?
So we are very excited about the funding that we're doing, and we will continue to make grants, as I talked about, sort of the leadership grants and capacity building grants and some of these social innovation grants. We're looking at a potential fourth funding stream, which would be, and we're just researching it now, but looking at potentially Montessori-inspired schools in war zones.
Educational funding?
An educational program, a framework that really focuses on education for peace, that focuses on the independence of the child. So we're really starting to look at some of these more progressive Montessori-inspired programs as ways to continue to reach children.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest challenge you've had in starting this and making it happen?
Well, aside from the fact that, you know, you think about a billion children. That's daunting, and that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Other than that, we're really just short of funds. You know, that's really the biggest challenge. To be honest with you, we have a spreadsheet of 300 programs. You know, we're funding 9 of them.
Right.
That's the reality. But we haven't vetted 300, but out of that 300, there's certainly a minimum of 100 that would meet our funding requirements. And so really, to me, the biggest challenge is raising awareness about this and trying to get the funding to try and continue to do great work, and really connecting, I think, kids here with kids there. That's something that I think we're going to spend a lot of the next year on, because technology is becoming so much more readily available, even in these hard-to-reach places. Having that connection between classrooms here in Fairfield County and classrooms very far away, but the reality is that our children share many of the same aspirations and hopes, and so we're hoping to do more of that in the upcoming future. So
you say, of course, it's not easy to get funds, and there's many programs to fund. What kind of fundraising do you do?
We do a lot of fundraising through our website. We have a Facebook page, and twice a year we have large fundraising drives. Actually this month we do an online auction, which sort of helps engage the whole community, and we have supporters from all around the country. And world who sort of come to our online auction and bid. And then in the spring we do a donor dinner, sort of a farm-to-table donor dinner for supporters who want to come and learn about our work. So we're continuously reaching out, and I find that once people sort of know about our work, they're very supportive of it. So we spend a lot of time just making sure that people know that we're here. We might be a small foundation in Fairfield County, but we're doing some good work, but we're here.
What do you find is the most rewarding part of the work that you're doing?
You know, I love waking up in the mornings and seeing the emails from the ground, from the field. I love getting the photos of Amina, the girl, the 12-year-old in Afghanistan who just got into a private school. So 2 years ago she was not in school, and 2 years later she is engaged as a leader, and a private school wants her to be part of their school. So when we get emails like that, especially photos and videos and stories, you know, it really makes you connect with them, and it makes me think about my own children and as they're growing up and challenges that they have, and the fact that these are children in dire situations, and the strength that they have to show every single day to get up and plow through the day and find hope in themselves and find confidence in themselves to have one day a bright future. But the reality is that they need our help.
You have 2 children,
I do.
Correct? And what are their ages?
They are 10 and 8.
So they are similar in age to what you were when you left Iran.
Yes. Yes.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. I did sort of think as I was filing all the IRS papers and meeting with the accountant and the attorney about the fact that my brother and I were my children's age at the time when we literally packed up our whole lives overnight and left, and you know, left everything, our school, our family, our grandparents. So I do think about sort of the irony of that. And every time, to be honest with you, I'm on a soccer field with my children or at a ballet recital, I do think about all the children that don't necessarily have access to that. And I go back to our mission, which is the empowerment and engagement of these children to be leaders of their communities, and I think about that defense of childhood. You know, my children have the right to play. They have the right to play piano. They have the right to have a play date. They're children. So I fundamentally believe in that defense of childhood, and that's sort of what we try and provide for these children, to have access to education, to the arts, to athleticism, things that really every child, when you think about it, should have access to.
Do you find that there are policy decisions, or you know, do you work in terms of changing legislation at all, and is that part of your mission?
Yeah, so it's definitely not part of our mission because we are a 501c3.
Oh, right.
So we're a nonprofit, so we can't get into any of the sort of political action things. But obviously, on a personal basis, I feel very strongly about the fact that we should drop laptops and books and not bombs, but that's sort of my personal philosophy, totally separate from the foundations.
And certainly, you know, this whole idea of starting an education, a Montessori-based education, it sounds like that's going to be a big push for you.
I hope so. We're really going to take our time to make sure that it's something that we would want to implement and could implement. You know, the most important thing when you do development work is that we can't impose it. It has to come from the most grassroots area. So as we look at this Montessori-inspired programming, it would need to be fully embedded into programs that are already very much at the heart of these communities, so that it doesn't feel imposed. But my guess is that these communities are going to be sort of very open to education for peace, which is at the end of the day what the whole philosophy of Montessori is.
Do you find with your programs that you go out looking for them, or are people coming to you with their programs?
So both. When we started the organization, we went out, knew about groups, researched groups, heard about groups, reached out to our board of directors and supporters. But we've made enough grants now where people are obviously hearing about our work. So we do have applications that come in and go through, as I said, a very tedious, long process. Because the reality is that we are fiduciaries of our donors. And so I view every dollar that comes in from a donor as an investment that we're making on their behalf. And so we take it very seriously. I used to work on Wall Street. And so so I really think about these grants as investments that we're making. And, you know, I look at the 5-year trajectories of these investments that we're making. So we're sort of very, very cautious investors. And we want to make sure that we're reaching outcomes. It doesn't mean that you don't take risk, but we sort of have a very tedious vetting process.
Okay. And if people want to learn more or join in on your auction, your website is the place to find out more.
Absolutely. We would love for people to Google Blossom Hill Foundation and take a look at our work and be part of, you know, you could be a thought partner. You don't, you know, we're not just looking for donors. We're always looking for people who can be thought partners for us and help us in any way.
That's wonderful.
Great.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience.
Thanks for having me.
It was wonderful
Thanks
to
so
have
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.